Welcome to the broadcast, my dear old fruits. It's the first broadcast of the month, so it's time for me to remind you to subscribe to the channel if you mean to subscribe, to click the notification bell, give it a tinkle if you wish to be notified whenever I publish a video, and thank you so much to anybody who sent a tip jar treat for a cup of coffee or a trinket in November. It's very kind of you and I truly appreciate it. I appreciate your engagement, your fruity thoughts and comments. I am absolutely blown away by the atmosphere here in the fruit basket, and I very much appreciate your presence here. Thank you very much. And on we go with December, and I'll try and make it as sparkly as I can for you, my dears. I try to come to you with a variety of different feels to every show, and I think in November we achieved a nice mix of punchy, fast delivery for those of you who like a royal romper and some theatrics, and also a few more subdued shows with more abstract thoughts and discussions, some rambles, because all of you like something different from me, and there's only so much that I can do to accommodate that, but I try my best to pitch a variety to you. And I also provided a rather serious broadcast with a little bit more gravity to it on the subject of immigration, and I was a little bit tentative about publishing it, but you received it so well. Thank you for allowing me to hold forth in the style that I feel is right for the time, and it depends what's going on any given day of any given week. You understand? So I have to kind of format it around that and my own life as well in between. So on with the show. Let's see how we go for December. I adored the footage of Cher meeting with Prince William. Is it Cher or Cher? I can never quite remember, but her name's Sherilyn, isn't it? So I'm going to say Cher, because it sounds a little bit grander, but wonderful to see her at 77 years old, absolutely gorgeous, in discussion with Prince William, and they had a lovely time. She, of course, was star billing at the Royal Variety Show, and I think I overheard them say during their chat that she had never performed at the Royal Variety Show before, which is unusual because it's been going on for so many decades, and she's very well acquainted with us. I don't even think she played at the Royal Albert Hall before, I think I heard her say, which is also quite a feat for her to miss because she's been knocking about so long, but it really was gorgeous to see her. And I looked up some images of the past, and it seems that she did meet her late majesty. There were photographs of her looking very 80s with kind of moonstruck hair, and delicious Emma Samms there as well. Wonderful meeting with the Queen in that era. And then a few years later, more gorgeous photographs with the Queen as she was older. So she has form there. She met with Granny, and she also met with Pa at some point as well. Granny and Pa have both been graced by our dear Cher. Wonderful, wonderful. I also love this photograph with Paloma Faith with the Waleses. And it's the expression on the gal's face. It's like a swamp creature, isn't it, or something? Emerging. That's what it reminded me of. Creature of the deep, if you will. Some swamp or bog creature. Quite unfortunate, but also just hilarious, and they were enjoying themselves, and that's what really matters. A Conservative politician, an MP, Bob Seeley, has proposed parliamentary legislation to deny Harry and Meghan Markle their Sussex titles. I'm very interested to see how this plays out. I also feel wary about it. But Bob Seeley is a member of the Commons Foreign Affairs Committee, and he wants to adapt laws that originally passed in the First World War to strip enemy German nobles of their British titles. He says, "In the next couple of weeks I shall present a bill in Parliament to strip the Duke and Duchess of Sussex of their royal titles. I'm not a Republican and support the monarchy, but after the latest instalment of the couple's feud with the rest of the royal family, I believe that Parliament and the Privy Council should consider a nuclear option. The Titles Deprivation Act of 1917 Amendment Bill will be listed on the Commons order paper next week. I'm intrigued to see what this amendment bill is and what it involves." He went on to say, "My aim is simple. If someone doesn't want to be royal, that's a decision we respect, but they should not keep the titles and privileges if they trash an institution that plays an important part in our nation's life. I'm wary about this, I'm cautious about this, because there are so many implications. It's not as easy as just removing them, and the Act and the letters patent are all surrounded by a plethora of elements that all involve repercussions if moved about. Prince Harry holds 4 different types of title, although the first type isn't strictly a title, it's an honorific, HRH, His Royal Highness. That is an honorific that he agreed not to use anymore, but he still possesses it. He is still HRH, it's just not part of his public style, but it is on loan. It is entirely in the gift of the sovereign, and it can be revoked. That is actually the easiest of the 4 elements to be revoked if the king wanted to do so. I still think it's highly unlikely that he would want to do so, or even will do so, but it's certainly worthy of discussion. The next element is the title of prince. My understanding is that it is actually also in the gift of the monarch, the title of prince, as seen throughout various letters patent, and there's no reason why the sovereign cannot remove the title, and it's also a decision that could not be challenged in court, since the royal prerogative in relation to honours and titles is said to be unreviewable or non-justiciable. So that is really rather interesting, and my concern was always that if they removed the ducal titles, he would revert to Prince Harry, Meghan would become Princess Henry, and they could proceed in that fashion, or would have the right to proceed in that fashion, which wouldn't really clear things up to our satisfaction, would it? But if my understanding is accurate, then indeed, theoretically speaking, both the ducal and princely titles could be removed, because it wouldn't really do to remove one and leave the other, would it, my dear? But if you can remove duke, prince and HRH, hey presto, and that means that you would be left with Sir Harry under the 3rd element of his titles, which is his appointment as a KCVO, a Knight Commander of the Royal Victorian Order, as he is. So if all other titles were lost, he would become Sir Henry or Sir Harry. And I wouldn't especially have a problem with that. I think that might be some sort of happy pathway for him to proceed as a Sir, if he wanted to, and Meghan would be Lady Mountbatten Windsor. Not officially Lady Meghan, although if she followed the style of others within the aristocracy, she could call herself Lady Meghan. Not officially, she would be Lady Mountbatten Windsor. But that could be some kind of resolution. But as for his honour, his gift from the late Queen as Duke of Sussex, honours are normally only withdrawn on recommendation of the Honours Forfeiture Committee following something like a criminal conviction. This kind of thing. So it's extremely unlikely, but as it was a personal gift of the monarch, it can be cancelled. There were 3 peerages created on that marriage: Sussex, Dumbarton and Kilkeel, and they can only be removed as it stands by an Act of Parliament, and a life peerage under the Life Peerage Act of 1958 confers the titles for life. This makes them extremely difficult to remove. It also would have retrospective implications for all predecessors of the Sussex title, not that there were many. Was there only one? I think there was only 1 or 2 Duke of Sussexes before, wasn't there? It would have actually implications for them, historically speaking. And it's even difficult for Harry to surrender or voluntarily hand back the titles after 1 year of them being bestowed upon him. It's almost impossible for him to even do that. And it would expose the king, if it were at his behest, to a real risk of litigation. Those titles, once they are bestowed, those kind of ducal titles, are wrapped around the person that receives them as a gift. They are wrapped quite inextricably, it seems, to them for life. But I shall certainly be following this very keenly to see what this bill involves and entails, as I'm sure you will, my dears, because there is no doubt that regardless of the culprit for this episode we see at the moment, with names being leaked, whether they are the right names or not, whether Mr. Scobie or the publishers had any involvement or not, there is no doubt that these years of slurs against the monarchy and the king originate from Harry and Meghan. That must be recognised. And it's being recognised all across society, and this really has been the talk of the town this week. Hugh Grosvenor is the Duke of Westminster, one of the kingdom's richest men, and he is going to be marrying Miss Olivia Henson next year at Chester Cathedral, with lots of partying going on at Eton Hall. And it's a talk of society, and every debutante, every ambitious arriviste, every gal of money, old, new, borrowed and blue, has been after him and trying to get his finger on their ring for many years, my dear. Well, Hugh Grosvenor controls the Grosvenor estate, and his father was a lovely, charismatic man, by the way, and a friend of the king's, but he died young. He died at the age of 64, and he left this vast estate of 10, 12, perhaps 15 billion to young Hughie. And the Grosvenor estate controls large swathes of London, such as Mayfair and Belgravia. We've spoken about the 7 families that own London, many of them of aristocratic provenance, including one family that are great fans of this channel. I'm not going to tell you if it's the Grosvenors or one of the other, or which of the other 7 that it is, but one of the heads of that family, not a distant relative, the head that owns a large part of London and beyond, is a viewer of this channel together with their beloved. I just wanted to throw that in because it tickles me, I enjoy it, and they have actually shown me ongoing kindness behind the scenes for coming on to 2 years now. But Hugh is the head of one of those families now, and he is incidentally rather charming, quite handsome, and a lifelong friend to both William and Harry. The king is his godfather, and he is godfather to a future king. Prince William selected him as one of Prince George's godfathers, and Harry selected him. He todgered along a few years after and selected him to be Prince Archie of Sussex's godfather. So do bear in mind, by the way, that even if Archewell hits the skids and the Tig goes tits up, then Godfather Grosvenor is just one birthday present away every year. You know, billionaires tend to receive rather an inordinate amount of requests to be godparents. Can you imagine, my dear? I can't think why, but billionaires are rather popular as godmothers and godfathers. So even when Big Bro had already done so, Little Bro todgered along and followed suit. Another one of Archie's godparents is, of course, Tiggy Pettifer, who used to be Tiggy Leg Burke, a nanny, a chaperone, governess, and friend of Harry's. And actually it surprised me because in Spare, Harry confided that he'd been dressed down by Tiggy. She had dressed him down for his actions and his reckless behaviour on Oprah and all forthcoming. And I say, go Tiggy, go Tiggy. And actually, I suppose props to Harry for admitting it, although he seemed to be also suggesting that she was in the wrong for dressing him down, and he felt a certain type of way about it, but at least he admitted that his dear Tiggy was not impressed with his behaviour. Well, not many of us were, my dear. Prince William could also be the best man for this forthcoming wedding, but it seems that their Majesties have been invited to the wedding, the Waleses have been invited to the wedding, but the Sussexes, out. Originally, they planned to extend an invitation, but now it's been decided that it's too controversial and would throw up too much drama. And do you see how the behaviour of the Montecitans has introduced the stench of scandal in such a brazen and vulgar style that British society, a British aristocracy, now finds themselves in this invidious position of having to take sides and positions? I cannot stress to you enough how discomforting it is. It is discomforting in the extreme, and it is tawdry. That's not to say that gossip isn't shared and gossip isn't rife, but one doesn't seek publicity. One doesn't share. One doesn't air one's dirty linen in public. It is not done. I cannot overemphasize this enough. This is why it is so shocking to so many of us. that this whole thing emerged. Occasionally memoirs will be published. Usually it's more historic and involves people that have passed on. For example, there is a memoir on my reading list at the moment that I have in one of my piles of many books yet to be read, one involving the Montague family, one or two of whom I know, so the subject matter is of interest to me. Actually, the memoir I'm talking about is quite a serious subject. It involves family incest between a father and son, actually. So that, for example, involved very serious matter. They don't involve trivial, petty squabbles, such as who got the biggest bedroom at Balmoral. Another character that's been voicing his objections to Omid Scobie is Catherine's Uncle Gary. Oh, we love Uncle Gary, don't we? Ha ha! We love him. He wrote an article for the Daily Mail, and I'll read just a few of the highlights for you. Never seen such a one-dimensional depiction of my niece Kate as the one I have just read in Omid Scobie's book Endgame. It's utterly ridiculous to consider that Kate is a racist. Racism isn't something which is inherent in everyone. It comes from an environment. Both Kate's mum, Carol, and I grew up in Southall, West London. Colour, race, age, creed, and religious beliefs have never been a factor in our friendship or values. To think Kate would buck that trend is totally bonkers. Bonkers! And then he goes on to speak about Omid Scobie's ridiculous accusations towards Carol Middleton, suggesting that she lined up Catherine in some sort of Machiavellian way to be exactly in the right place at the right time to ensnare William at university and make sure they were in the right year together. He says these accusations of calculated orchestration at St Andrews are a laughable theory. It would be laughable if it wasn't so tragic and so disgusting and despicable, to be honest. He says, does Scobie really believe that Carol was sitting there in a war room, a war room in the basement of Bucklebury, planning out some devious strategy, saying, right, if we put Kate in the right place on this day, then bang, fireworks. For me, Meghan is too rumbustious and desperate to be the centre of attention. Kate will generally put people at ease, make them feel relaxed, and try to make them feel important. It's a superpower which is very difficult to pull off when you have a Zebedee character. I really did love this. He says that Meghan is a Zebedee character bouncing around, demanding special treatment and the spotlight. Zebedee is a gorgeous character. I looked him up on YouTube. He's from a rather ancient children's television programme, The Magic Roundabout. And there's this character, I don't know much about him, but he looks adorable. Yes, it's a he, it's got a moustache. It bounces all over the place, though. You know, gets in their royal dome. I'm here, look at me, do this, do that, springing around, boing, in a vulgar way. I suppose that's what he's getting at. But I rather love the name as well, Zebedee. The Duchess of Zebedee, what do you think? Or Princess Lilibet Diana Zebedee. Or even Prince Zebedee. I rather love it. Zebedee. Indeed. Lovely new nickname for Meghan there. Very good, Uncle Gary. We send Uncle Gary all the love, don't we, my dear? And as you might have read, also Sir Trevor Philips, who is the Race and Equality campaigner, the former chairman of the Equality and Human Rights Commission. He's been talking about how silly this whole affair is. And he said, we have the largest uniquely mixed race population anywhere in the developed world that has come about through romance. This is the point he makes, which is very good. It came about through romance rather than coercion, and they could have been standard bearers for that. Yes, they could have. What a missed opportunity. It did. The way that race relations involved in this nation might have had a rocky start in the early days, and nothing's ever perfect, but it came about very well, splendidly well through the years, through romance, through love, through relationships, through friendships, through neighbours, through community. It evolved over a rocky road, but naturally to a smoothness, to something really rather special here. And not through the coercion that we see forced upon us in some absurd back-to-front way over the last few years. where you are prodded and poked and goaded and basically forced into ideologies and philosophies, modes of thinking and scams, sometimes just downright scams, to be honest with you. In some of the Scobie interviews, and I haven't watched all of them, but I've seen snippets of some of them, and I've noticed that the interviewers are useless. He actually doesn't come across as the most likeable man in the world, but he handles the interviewers very well and the interviews because they are inept. The one thing you can say about Emily Maitlis, who did over Andrew, Prince Andrew, is that at least she came prepared and she was forensic. And there were questions within questions and she followed through, you know, unlike Oprah, who I'm sure is capable of doing that, but didn't do that for Meghan. And it's the same with many of the presenters here in the kingdom. And it's why I've been grumbling in the past about, for example, a programme like This Morning, you know, now they hire presenters, many of whom used to be in reality shows. You know, they spring up as reality stars and then go on to have presenting careers, and some of them are perfectly capable in some respects, but they don't have the training of a journalist, for example, that they once upon a time used to have, that sort of training, or even an education, you know, with a wide sort of breadth of experience and knowledge, you know, just a general knowledge of some history and geography, humanities and the classics. Not in an over highbrow way, my dear, but you know, it's this dumbing down of standards, and I've seen it in the people that interview Omid Scobie. They don't follow through with their questions and he gets away with things, which is very frustrating for us, isn't it, my dears? Omid Scobie states that he never signed off any copy of any draft he provided with the names that have been mentioned, the King and Catherine. And he swore with his hand on his heart to one of the interviewers on his family's life that it's not a publicity stunt, he said. And when he said that part, he came across quite believably, but they don't intercept to try to get to the heart of the matter, as a lawyer would, or a barrister, which is what they should do. They should quiz further and ask if he shared those names with the publisher at any point. Did those names come from him to anyone, not just in a draft or in a manuscript that he provided? Were they mentioned in conversation or chatter with the publisher? Were they initially scribbled down but then cast aside? Were there other names that were mentioned? Are those two names, Catherine and Charles, the names that he had heard? Because what he tells us implies us that they were the names that he had heard. And if it, you know, one can understand if he doesn't want to give away his sources and refuses to state them. But there is other information that could have been extracted from Mr. Scobie if they had just pushed and not let him get away with just giving a sort of blanket statement to some of the answers. Because it's in the details of what he doesn't tell us, not what he does tell us, which is that, hand on his heart, it's not a publicity stunt, hand on his heart, he didn't write down those names in any final copies that he provided to the publisher. Fair enough. Perhaps he's telling the truth, but go around what he gives us and approach what he doesn't give us. That is the job of an interviewer. You know, I very much enjoyed the Queen's style as she was cloaked in blue and splendid diamonds for an engagement at the Guildhall. I thought it looked really, really lovely. And she praised the Rifles, who are one of the British Army's key infantry regiments, for showcasing their skills magnificently in recent years. And at the coronation, the Rifles Award dinner also welcomed the Duke and Duchess of Gloucester. I think Brigitte Gloucester there had elements of green, didn't she? Very, very lovely. And they accompanied the Queen, who is also Colonel-in-Chief of the Rifles. And the Duchess of Edinburgh wound up her trip in Colombia. She seemed to have had an absolutely splendid time there. You can tell just by looking at the photographs that she's bringing back lots of cherished memories and maybe a couple of friends. It's amazing how she seems to make personal connections and create a very intimate atmosphere. Looking through the photographs, they are just completely and utterly smitten with our Sophie, aren't they? From these really rather brief visits, she must give them such genuine attention for them to look at and gaze at her in that way, as if they are very much fond of her and in an atmosphere of affection. I think it's wonderful. And aren't the fruits of Colombia gorgeous? I've got some Colombian friends, but I've never been there. And my friends are rather sexy, I've got to tell you, male and female. So Must visit one day and see what it's all about. It looks great fun. But she attended a fashion showcase of work by designers who have been impacted by the armed conflict. And as you can see from her engagement with the people, it flies in the face of Prince Harry's characterisation of the other members of the royal family who just tick off engagements to try and up their tally, implying that people like Princess Anne, who have many hundreds of engagements per year, are just, sort of performative. They're not like Harry and Meghan, who really invest their time and feeling into things. They're just there to tot up the numbers. They don't really care. What an effrontery, what an absolutely vile thing to say about his own family members who work very hard on behalf of the king and put real love into it, as Sophie is doing. And Sophie has a special gift for relating to all generations, as we saw photographs of her at a care home the other day with the elderly and those in the winter season. And here she is enjoying a very funky time with those in the spring season and early summer. Eli Flore said, River, could you comment on Omid Scobie's English accent? As I am not a native English-speaking person, I lack the ability to analyse the way he speaks, but I find that he has a fake elegance. To me, it sounds totally artificial and pretentious. In a way, he has applied the same cosmetic surgery to his voice as to his face. Well, that was very fruity, my dear. I don't entirely agree with you, I must be honest, and I am pretty good with analysing voice. Some of my friends call me Professor Higgins, but I do know my stuff. That doesn't mean that I always get it right, and I can only offer my opinion. But I don't entirely agree with you about him having a fake elegance and totally artificial and pretentious. But, I'm grateful that you've asked for my opinion. I enjoy talking about voice, actually, and speech and language, that kind of thing. So it gives me a chance to do that. My understanding is that he was born in Wales. I don't really detect any Welsh accent there. Grew up in Oxford, has a Persian mother, a British father, and studied in London. And he travels a lot, doesn't he? He might have sort of transatlantic influences, as I do, actually. And I think that his accent, it's not really an accent that he has, but a style of speech. I think it is in keeping with that range of influences, mainly from the south of England, but also elements of London and the transatlantic, but also his industry. I don't think it's especially affected, meaning that I don't think it's especially different from those who have grown up in the same parts of England as him and received education, similar establishments as he has. It's not entirely different. What I will say is that there is quite a deliberate pace to his voice, but I think he is being cautious. We must remember that just as some people have a phone voice that they use and sort of naturally put on, if you will, different to their natural speaking voice, this happens when people go on television and they're not used to being interviewed as well. We also adjust our voices. I don't talk exactly the same in my natural day-to-day life as I talk to you on a recording. Sometimes I can be more theatrical. I can over-enunciate a little more than I normally would because I want to make sure that I'm understood and be intelligible. And I will often pitch it a little louder so that I don't come across with too much sort of low energy and too subdued. One makes adaptations. I also talk quicker in real life, I should say. And if I did that here and now, then it would come across as rather mumbly and you'd miss a lot of stuff that I say. So we all make adaptations, as I'm sure Mr. Scobie does. So we have to bear that in mind when we're considering how he speaks on television. So no, Eli, I don't share exactly the same criticisms that you have for his accent. For example, where you say it has a fake elegance, I don't sense anything particularly elegant about it, whether it's genuine or fake at all. It doesn't come across as an especially elegant accent or inelegant. It's actually quite a neutral sounding accent, in my opinion. But if there was some insincerity that I sensed, it was in his smooth handling of some of the questions from easy interviews. He was prepared, he was thoughtful in his delivery, he is deliberate which is fair enough. And he's also well briefed. He knows that he's there to sell books, and he always brings the subject matter back to buying the book. Have you read the book? He says, will you read the book? If you don't, he says, you don't have to buy a copy, you can rent it. So it comes across rather humble. And any publicist will tell you that this is the first piece of advice that you give to anyone who goes on these shows. Remember to sell the garment, as they say in the fashion word, sell the garment, sell the book. You must always bring it back to that. And he does that very successfully in all his interviews. He is there to sell copy. Regardless of any conflict or drama, it can all be used to his advantage. And that is what he does. But Eli, for me, I think it is actually the combination of that rather careful, considered speech, together with elements of his physicality that might give off a sort of sense of the artificial instinctively. Because he says he's used Botox in the past. I've got no problem with people who use Botox or do anything to themselves. And I don't think he's ugly, by the way. It's his decision what he does with himself. I'm more intrigued with what's going on with his eyelids. I realise he's got some natural colouring. I love the natural colouring of people's eyelids, whether they're fair-skinned or dark-skinned. I enjoy it. I enjoy it in people of Omid Scobie's type of mix and his colouring. But there's something going on in those eye sockets that I don't think there was a few years before. I wondered if he might have had some blepharoplasty and had some scars from that, maybe, that he might be covering with eyeshadow. It could be my imagination, but I think it might be exacerbated by heavy eyelids that could be the result of Botox, sort of pushing down on the eyelids like that. But they seem to be bulging out in a way that they didn't used to be bulging out. I've got quite heavy eyelids myself. I have done since a child. So I understand. That's why I wouldn't be able to have anything pushing down too much here, or I wouldn't be able to see. But the fact that he doesn't have much movement going on there as well makes him look more robotic than he might be if he didn't. And when you put that in combination with his rather measured, even-paced speech, it does give off perhaps a certain contrivance or artificiality that maybe does come from within his own psyche. One thing you might be sensing is that he might be suppressing certain elements of his natural speaking voice that might be a little bit more camp and a little bit more gay. This is just a possibility that he doesn't really want to let fly in that sort of setting, in that sort of context. Whereas when he's with his intimates, with his friends, his companions, he might be a little bit more fruity and flirty and saucy and gay. And it's not unusual to find that in all kinds of gentlemen and in all kinds of stars, actually. Some who are openly gay and some who are not, and nobody has to know anybody else's business. But I've come across characters in public life myself who, male homosexual characters who speak totally and utterly different in private. Their way of talking is more flamboyant, it's more gay, it's looser, it's less guarded, but some of these characters don't feel comfortable offering that side of themselves in public. And so in order to make sure that they don't let loose, they are very controlled and contained and speak in a certain tone and in a certain way, maybe a little lower than they normally would, to present themselves the way that they wish to be viewed. But I do realise that I can't sit here in all seriousness and complain about artifice and pretentiousness when I'm dripping in jewels and veils and all kinds of accoutrement, my dear. But I do hope that you understand that I like to come to you with a sense of the theatre, so there is a different context here, my dear. I like to be rather playful, but I must be honest with you and say that I don't find his accent especially fake or artificial. I could be very wrong, but I don't really sense that. I don't sense anything too objectionable about it, but it is more what he says and what is contained within those words, which makes for very difficult listening. And it is actually when he came for Sophie, when he slags off Sophie with that ridiculous whose Oprah moment that he's been criticising. It's when he came for her that all the gloves were off. For me, don't fuck with Sophie. Do you understand, you little shit? I'm sorry, but Sophie is all goodness. She is all golden goodness. And to drum up some sort of objection to an off-the-cuff remark that had nothing to do with her colour or her race whatsoever, and it wasn't even shade being thrown at Oprah. It was in order to dodge any questions about the Oprah interview that she said, Oprah who? To Camilla Tominey. To make something out of that and suggest that at worst it was some sort of casual bigotry or whatever. He said, I'm sorry, my dear, but that is plain crafty. That is plain crafty. And I won't have it. I won't have it. So don't fuck with her. Thanks for joining me, my darlings. I look forward to seeing you in the next broadcast, and thank you for your company. Toodle pip.